over them in the light. And I load up my brush with some paint. And when you do a dry brush technique, 'cause that's after all what I'm doing here, is that we don't want to have a brush loaded with too much liquid. When the brush is loaded with too much liquid, this is what happens. Right? I have a lot of water in my brush. And I try to apply the paint. It kind of goes on and I get a glob, but I don't really get any texture to the end. We want to extract some of the liquid out of the brush. Still have it nice and loaded with paint, but we don't want to have that excess water. We want to use a dry brush technique. And the dry brush, like its name, means that there's not a lot of water in the brush. It's on the drier side. So we extract, you hit the brush into the paper towel. I don't have an excess amount of water. And I want to paint that texture to the end of the tree. And I hold the brush on an angle, almost parallel to the page, and then you scrape. Unfortunately, if you have too much paint, water in my brush like I do right now, I eventually get to the point where the brush dries up a little bit. I get this ever-expanding tree until you wind up with a nice shape. You know, I seem to keep doing that, you know. I really want it. There, that's what I want. That broken edge, just like that, right? And then you get, like what's happening to me, you get this ever-expanding tree until you get it right. But that's okay. Who's ever going to know anyway, right? So now I'm coming down to here, right? Once we take this on, no one's going to know that that tree was not that tall, right? And I want some broken, there's not a lot of holes that we see through that tree, but there are some in here, right? So especially in this part when I get down to here. So again, I want that dry brush technique, and I have a light touch on the paper, and I'm scraping. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with that. Now we go into a tree that's on the red side. So I rinse my brush out, and then you load it up with a little bit of alizarin, or I'm gonna take a little bit of cadmium red deep, and some alizarin crimson for the violet. There's a lot of violet in that color. And again, I'll do the same thing with the brush.
So alizarin has blue in it.
It's more on the violet side, yeah.
Okay.
Again, I'm going to do the same thing, but I'm going to let the colors kind of mingle on the page.
And but they can't mingle if you would put too much dry.
If my green starts to dry, then you're not going to get a fusion wash. Right, and I'm going to switch. I'm going to go back to the green. I should have done this earlier. But you see what I just did? I had some red left over my brush, and I added it to my green, and I grayed out my green, which is not what I wanted to do. So I got to compensate, and I got to put back some more green paint here. I'm going to paint this green tree. You can see how less vivid and more grayed out the green is because I had a little bit of red left over my brush. So don't do that.
Would you use two brushes?
You could. It would not be a bad idea to do that. All right. So here's where the green trees end. Right. And it's, again, pretty solid here. I'm going to paint the green tree right up to the edge of where that red tree begins, which is roughly right about here. Paper's nice and wet. I left a couple holes in here. I could let a couple of these colors mingle together, and I rinse my brush out. And likewise, I don't want any green in my red mix, because you'll just brown out your red. I want my red to be nice and vibrant. And as long as the two colors are kind of equally wet, they'll kind of fuse together in the spot and not like they are doing down in here, and not mix on the page. I want them to kind of hold their own boundaries. Now again, this tree just goes all the way red through. I'm trying to see the overall shape to the tree, and I'm also trying to get a nice texture on the bottom of this tree where it meets the grass. So just like I was on the top of the tree trying to get some texture up into here, now I'm trying to do the same thing on the bottom edge of the tree where it meets the grass. I want that to be a nice shape. Here it doesn't matter because that's where the trees end and the field begins, and you just see a dark shadow in there. I'll continue up my tree. It's pretty densely filled in. There's a couple spots here along the way. This would be a good, say I just was a hypocrite.
Yeah, I saw that.
But I'm going to drop a little color in there, and I'm also going to take a little clean water, and I've been doing this lately. I just sprinkle just a tiny bit of water into the wash, and you can start to see that it's giving me a little lighter value on my tree. And it makes it look more like a watercolor. But don't overdo it. It begins to look like a gimmick. And I don't intend to have that happen. But just a couple sprinkles here and there gives you a nice look, like there are some clusters of leaves that are a little lighter than the rest.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Now, I'm going to try to paint the edge of my tree right to where the green part begins. All right. I'm pretty satisfied with that. Now, the tree on top also has some red leaves up in here, and again, I'm holding the brush on the side and I'm scraping up. Sometimes I even like to just use that little corner of the page to kind of paint a little cluster coming up. But I'm mostly doing the scraping thing. I just want a good shape. Now I'm gonna rinse my brush out, get the green back in it. And it seems that the green goes all the way across to here. I'm just trying to take note how these branches grow. It might be an elm, and elms kind of grow diagonally up at the top, more horizontally out at the side. Okay. And then I want, before that red tree dries, I want to, this whole area is loaded with the green trees. And I want the two colors to kind of fuse together. And like I always say, not only does that look good, that's fun to do. And this whole area gets filled in pretty much solid green. All right, and so that's easy enough, right? Just a solid, just a solid shot of green. And I'm looking at that area in here. I want some texture on that. Again, a relatively dry brush. I scrape and lift up. You see what I'm doing?
Yeah.
All right, and that gives us an unpredictable shape, more tree-like. That's texture, okay? And it's good texture, I hope.
Mm-hmm.
See my ever-expanding tree?
Mm-hmm.
And then I forgot to do a little bit of orange and red over there. I'm gonna take a little orange and a little bit of that red I had a moment ago. And it seems to be like a dozen colors in that one spot. And then it seems to even go to green. Rinse the brush out again. Anne had said, why don't I have a second brush? And it's probably would have been a good idea, but I'm too lazy right now to go in there and get it out. This is what watercolor does so well. So make sure that you do it, this wet blending of colors.
Yeah, it's beautiful the way this blended here.
And then again, I have at home I have a little spritzer bottle, and I give it a quick spritz, or if I'm on location, I just do that a couple times. I want to dip my hands in a dirty water.
Yeah.
So, but you see those little dots give you some texture in the light of the part of the tree, and I think it looks pretty. I think it looks pretty good when we do that. And even sometimes what happens, sometimes the water hits the edge, and that gives you like an unpredictable little edge of texture as it goes up into the sky, which is kind of a nice thing. Now we get a tree. Now, Ann, you and I were just mixing some of the greens. This is like a little
lighter
a limey green too. Almost has like a little extra phthalo green in it or something, and a little lighter in value. So I'm going to take the parent green, and I'm going to add it to the sunlight green. Those of you that have mixture greens know what I'm talking about. And I'm getting a slightly lighter, more lemony green. You can see the color, and I kind of nailed that color, right? Mm-hmm. On the birch. I'm not going to worry about the bark, that lighter bark. I'm going to lift that. We can lift that out with some magic erase later on. So don't worry about painting around it or trying to preserve the branch. We can always do that next week if we want.
Magic erase.
Yes.
He showed us that with the birds. Remember when he did?
Remember I rubbed
yeah,
out?
yeah,
So
yeah.
we can do the same thing. I'll take a
Yeah.
piece of tape and I'll cut it and I'll paint out the, I'll rub out the line for the bark. Again, scraping the brush on the side, trying to get a nice texture to the end of the tree here. I love when that was a nice little shot. And that looks like an accident, but yet it looks like texture on a tree. That's just what I was talking about with like the friends Halls, and you know, sometimes Arthur coming in there with the brush and, you know, making a shape. Sometimes it's just a scrape in the right direction, and then you wind up with a nice effect. Now I'm gonna grab.
So you don't concern yourself with the trunks at all?
No,
Not till after.
no, not till after. And I can, the
till
darker
after.
ones I can just put on at any time at the end. The lighter ones I've used the magic erase to lift them out, and it, you know,
They're not prominent in the
they
picture.
aren't, and they shouldn't be prominent in your painting. They're there, but they're not. They shouldn't stand out either, right?
Unless you're focusing on.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah,
Unless you're focusing on what?
unless you're actually making the painting
Focusing
about the trunk.
on the tree trunk.
Yep. And then we go down into the yellow, and because the paper's wet, it wet blends together. Going back to the green. Now we have another orange tree coming up. Again, I did a little texture along the bottom edge of these trees where it meets the grass. That's nice, you know, so don't just only put the texture at the top part of the tree. Make sure you do it on the bottom as well where you see it. And then we go into a cluster of orange leaves. So I have some cat orange. And again, with the texture, trying to get a nice edge. Wet blend, fuse together when possible. It almost seems to go into some pink down here, and then back to the green. Pretty solid, not a lot of holes, sky holes in this area. I'm looking at that, not too many in there either.
And you think, thank God I got to the end of the paper, right?
Yep. Okay, and now we